The Butcher of Ark, Epilogue, Letter of the Chronicler. Dear Turus, I had to chuckle upon reading your latest letter. No, the Black Libra does not exist, and yes, I do consider your research on its machinations a waste of time. Why, you ask me? It's very simple. J.L. Tennyson was stark raving mad, up to the last sensible corner of his brain. He suffered from horrid delusions, and nearly everything you have read on the previous pages is nonsense. Now, I'm well aware that this claim fits the book's closing statement only too well, but allow me to shed light on the life and deeds of the Butcher of Ark, on what truly happened, and you will see how what I say is infinitely more sensible than Tennyson's metaphysical ramblings on demons, the Black Libra and the fire. J.L. Tennyson was born to a common carpenter and his companion in the year 6056 after Starfall, in a small village going by the name Northwind. Therefore, his true age at the beginning of the chronicle was 32 instead of 28. This also increases the age at which he was abandoned from 2 to 4. Being of frail stature and small body size, his age seems to simply have been underestimated. His natural father went by the name Samael Chipblade and was an utterly violent and mentally challenged man. Both of these streaks, it pains me to say, have to be attributed to his deeply rooted religiousness. Obsessively punctual, he visited the local temple several times each day to pray, never missed even a single mass or sermon, and he was able to recite all of the past 101 verses in their full length. Nothing was more important to him than to abide by the path and to love our Lord, and these were his exact expectations from his fellow villagers, which, as you might be able to guess, led to him living a very isolated life. Though he usually followed the priest's sermons, he often thought their contents too shallow and Northwind's handling of pathlessness too lenient. When he did not pray, he worked, denying himself desires such as making love, alcohol, or even music. And so the village was surprised when rumors that Samael would become a father began to circulate. Though he denied it, everyone knew who the mother was, a young wandering whore, often seen at his house in the past weeks. The public knowledge of the pregnancy put Samael in a difficult situation. Abandoning a pregnant woman and thus committing murder on babe and woman both was a grave sin, even if the woman concerned was of low status or whore. But more importantly, it did not in the least fit self-perception. So he picked the only option available to him. He married the woman, not older than 20 winters at the time, and 5 months later, young JL was born. As one might imagine, he was not born under a lucky star. Though Samael had always been slyly aggressive and quick-tempered according to the priest I interrogated, this aggression only increased with parenthood. The fear and horror recognizable in Chipblade's young companion had been almost graspable during the 3-day mass, he confessed. So things took their course, and, as if it had already done so, Samael sealed himself and his family increasingly off from the outside world. By now you will have guessed what happened, dear Turus, so I will keep things short. Samael Chipblade abused both his companion and his young son. What began with scolding, looks and curses slowly turned to regular beatings with a birch. This he of course merely did to protect his loved ones, as he confessed to the priest once. Both his companion and his boy were befallen by demons, horrible demons whose only purpose it was to drive them from the right path, to taint them. One cannot purge them forever, he said to the priest, his voice shaking, because they always return no matter what you do, no matter how devout the prayers or how chaste one's thoughts, they always return. Why the priest didn't intervene? He did not fully suspect how bad things truly were. Corporal punishment for children and women is not unheard of, especially not among the rural populace, and the truth only dawned on him as, one morning, he watched a young woman go to the village well. A gust of wind freed her from the veil and revealed an abundance of cuts, bumps and broken bones. Do you remember the butcher's crow-like nose? It is a remnant of such an exorcism. There is little more to say of this sad period of his life, except for its tragic end. In an act of despair, JL's mother took her life, but only after she had crushed her husband's skull with a heavy hammer. The starved boy was found 5 days later in his parents' bedchamber. The empty eyes focused on the bloody altar of Malthus. To this day, I do not know whether he had been present during the horrible deed, or whether he had entered the room when both parents were already dead. He did not cry, spoke no word, and his eyes had nothing in common with those of a 4-year-old anymore. When I asked why the boy had not been given to a family from the village, and with lowered eyes, the priest confessed that no one was willing to take him in. A child that had already seen murder and violence at such a young age would undoubtedly bring misfortune, and those near it, people said. And besides, times were hard and wheat rare. In the end, JL was dressed in a woolen blanket, and the priest travelled with him to the Fog Road and deposited him before a shrine, in the hopes that someone would take pity on the young boy. You already know of Gilman, the tanner who would later raise him. He shared neither Samuel's Chiplett's religious fervor nor his brutality. But, as you certainly conclude from the butcher's writing, he gave everything to the boy except for an environment in which his scarred soul could heal. As he turned 11 winters old, he began an apprenticeship with the local priest and came to oversee the Temple of Folkville 5 years later. The villagers saw him as a silent, dutiful man with constantly uneasy expression, and it did indeed take 3 days before his disappearance following the Star Summer's Night feast was noted. In the 3rd chapter of his account, JL finally tells us of the events that transpired at the Red Ox, a small tavern not far from Ark, where an essentially harmless act of revenge escalated into his first killing. In incredible detail, he recounts the inebriating feelings that took hold of him during the murder, then turning his attention to his first encounter with Callion, who accompanied him as a mentor and friend during the following moons and winters. Here, however, fact and fiction, truth and fantasy begin to mix for the first time. The innkeeper of the Red Ox might still remember a sad-looking, thin man being humiliated, who then, together with the 2 riders, had disappeared early in the next morning. A man such as Callion, however, had never been seen at the tavern. Now, while this inconsistency might be attributed to the countless faces the innkeeper must have encountered since, the fact that both giants, Naratil and Jorah Dal Karak, who indeed are quite nasty fellas, have been seen in Ark a few days later, both in perfect health, makes opposition pointless. Now, you have not misread, Turas. Both men, who, according to the butcher, died a bloody death that night, are in fact well and alive, and I have actually spoken to them during my inquiries. I don't know what truly happened at the Red Ox, but I strongly suspected at that evening JL's inner need to take revenge for his humiliation caused his insanity to take root for the first time. He felt weak, and the violence he was subjected to unconsciously reminded him of the situations his father used to put him in. At the same time, he was obviously lacking the power to do something against this, and at this point his imagination gained the upper hand and he conjured up a variant of the events that simply were never true. He then fled head over heels through the forest. Now, you may say that my claim that the murders were a mere product of his imagination is nothing more than conjecture. But let me first continue with my account and explain my underlying thesis later. About 6 months before the murders, with a proven connection to J.L. Tennyson began, he claimed to have arrived in Ark. He posits to have found refuge in a tavern together with his mentor and his companion, only to wipe out a sort of child's brothel in the Undercity the following day, together with Callion. Again, the innkeeper of the Dancing Nomad recognized JL on a drawing, but was unable to remember a person fitting the description of Callion. Even the brothel I mentioned had never existed in the form described, as my contacts in the Undercity have assured me of. But is secrecy and covertness not the whole point of such an institution, you might ask me now? Yes, dear Turus, it is, but such an establishment could only exist under the protection of a large organization such as the Relatha. And under these circumstances you can be assured that the destruction of such a, it pains me to say, profitable source of income would not have been tolerated by the Relatha. No, both of us know what that organization is capable of, and what they do with those acting against their authority. But what actually happened was that more and more homeless and sick people were found murdered in the Undercity's alleys. All of them barely recognizable from myriads of stabbing wounds. Tanner's son's thumbprint. The first moment of both JL's narrative and the truth aligning occurred 3 months later, and coincided with the passing of the so-called Axum. Back then, the first corpses were discovered, and here we begin to talk of the Butcher of Ark due to the brutal manner of the victim's death. The following years, during which JL caused havoc in Ark, managed to escape first the guard and later the Holy Order itself due to the perfidious intelligence. A total of 24 murders were committed, when the Butcher's involvement is beyond doubt, and another dozen where it cannot be ruled out. A second person was never involved, and not all of his victims had been guilty of crimes. You probably ask yourself the same question as in the beginning of this letter. Why the deviations? Why invent a mysterious secret society with the aim to keep evil in check? Why the talk of a nectar of sin enabling the murderer to enter the memories of his victim to be rewarded with sexual ecstasy? I, for my part, have found a solution to this riddle, and it rests on the conviction that very few of this world's murderers and criminals view themselves as bad, instead believing to do the right thing. We are so good at creating models of thought that help us in reconciling our deeds with our self-perception. There was no difference with J.L. Tennyson, and the essence of what caused him to commit his crimes is deeply rooted in his childhood. You can surely imagine that his childhood had profound effects on J.L. Tennyson. I am certain that on an unconscious level, J.L. knew what his father did unto him, and that he hated him with a passion. You also know that children cannot yet distinguish between themselves and their environment, especially in early years. I suspect that this was the cause of JL too. The more he hated his father, the more he hated himself, blamed himself for the pain endured by his mother and him. Father had said it, hadn't he? I only want to protect you. It's the demons, always the demons. You always allow them back into your hearts. Again and again the boy failed in this, again and again. And again, he and his mother had to pay dearly for it. How he wished for peace, his father's love, for harmony. But he would never receive it. For when the demons possessed his mother one last time, they robbed him of the only two people he had ever known. Unable to even try to process his experiences, the horrible images, the raw hate, the guilt and the biting accusation, a deep-rooted realization were confined in a mental casket that his child's mind buried deep in his subconsciousness, so he would feel nothing but a diffuse, omnipresent fear that kept him from ever experiencing something like true happiness. Until the day of his trauma, when he was confronted with his repressed memories for the first time by seeing his own corpse, I am sure that finding his own rotting corpse represented the part of him that had been repressed and locked away, sleeping all these years. Now, however, its burdening presence had become too strong to ignore any longer. He would die if he had not learned to understand, calm or heal it, and so he fled head over heels out of his life, his only compass being an impalpable feeling that would lead to his death, much like the flame is in the moth. It punished him with an insufferable fear when he acted against it, and it rewarded him with maniacal ecstasis when he did something right. Without that feeling, he would have never left his village, never began to kill for his imaginary construct of the Black Libra. Indeed, without it, he would have never become the Butcher of Ark, instead ending his peaceful, if a bit sad existence as a priest of Fogville. He dubbed this feeling fire. I call it searching for forgiveness. With every decision, with every murder, every step he took, he wanted only one thing: to triumph where he failed before, to finally achieve the peace he had always hoped for. He wanted to cleanse the world of the demons that had caused so much suffering for his family. His father had, after all, only wanted to protect his family from them. Can you follow? The demons, the fire, the Black Libra. It was all nothing more than his subconsciousness desire for absolution. Absolution for a crime he never committed. The demons JL saw in his victims were nothing more than projections of the guilt he felt for the deaths of his parents, and by murdering, he tried to atone for it. Maybe my thesis seems absurd to you at my first glance, but think of all the parallels between JL's account and his past. The likely most obvious would be his choice of words: sinner, demon, and soul cleanser. Humanity is weak and rotten, but there is a hidden order protecting it from its downfall. What could this be if not a reconstruction of his familial background? It continues with the imaginary person of Callion. Is he not an idealized incarnation of what JL would have wanted to be? Strong, lawless, full of desire to live, and absolutely devoted to the Black Libra, without the doubt JL had until the end, and that would ultimately be the cause of the last parallel to his childhood, his failure. Though dozens had to give their life because of JL Tennyson's mad quest for forgiveness, it ended with the same cognition it had ended for the small boy in the past. No matter the self-sacrifice, at the end he had been too weak. His will, his scrupulousness, his belief in the correctness of his cause, it was to no avail. He had failed and left this world as a broken man. You seem dear to us. The parallels are too obvious to be merely accidental. I've been unable to decipher merely two symbols in his story: the veiled woman appearing in his vision and the admission ritual. I do have my theories, but they are fake still. You can calmly lean backwards though. The day a wild mage enters your room to kill you and then digest your sins, I am sure they are countless, will not arrive. The Black Libra does not exist, and neither does the Fire or Callion. To me, the story of the Butcher of Ark is primarily the sad testimony of a man who took countless innocent lives on his quest for forgiveness. Who in the end is to blame? He? His father? And if you choose the latter, how can you know whether Samael Chiplate, with his sick religiousness and his purges too, had been merely trying to heal a scar on his soul? A scar on his soul he also had no fault in creating. Here, J.L. Tennyson was right. It is an eternal chain of cause and effect. A cycle. And nowhere in it will you find someone to blame.